Welcome everybody. We're really glad to have you here for this final Library Futures Task Force Town Hall. I'm Harriet Hopf. I'm Professor of Anesthesiology and I'm co-chair of the task force with Richard Preiss, who's in the Department of English. What we're going to do today is, first, I want to let everybody know, if you haven't noticed, that this is being recorded. So if we are recording it specifically so that people can view it who aren't here. So just to let you know that is what's happening. So there's that. How this is going to work is we're going to, Richard's going to give about a 25-30 minute introduction to what the Library Futures Task Force charges, what we're doing, what we've done so far. And then we're going to open it up for questions and comments and concerns and whatever you want to say to us. I'll explain how we do it at the end, but the way we're going to do that is have you electronically raise your hand and I will call on people in order. I will do my best to get to everybody, but experience is that we won't necessarily get to everybody. We will have our emails up, so you're welcome to email us. So, please just stay engaged and that'll be great. I will be monitoring the chat. We do have some questions that we already received that we will try to acknowledge as well. We like to start out by finding out who is here. So Sean is going to pop up a little survey just to kind of get a sense of faculty, staff, student, or other community member. So if you don't mind voting, then we'll sort of find out what it says. I think I see a few students here today, which is really exciting because that's a group we have not heard a lot from. I also see that there are faculty and staff and people from sort of affiliated communities as well, which is great. We'll give you like another minute to finish it and then we'll see what the results are and then I will hand it off to Richard.
Okay, yeah, we're just waiting for that
just
poll
hand it
result
off
to
and
pop up. There
we
is.
go. No students. Okay.
Oh,
Faculty
that's
and staff.
disappointing. Yeah, students
okay.
are sort of a prize population for us, where whenever we get like one student, we want to just corner them and ask them all our questions. But that's okay. We've got plenty of people here to have a healthy discussion. Thanks, Harriet. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Preiss. I'd like to begin by thanking you for taking time out of your day, the end of your day, to be here, especially at this particularly fraught moment with, what do we have, a pandemic boiling over in our state, a holiday season that's just accelerating it, and a seemingly endless semester that we're all just trying to stagger to the end of. Nobody feels like they have the bandwidth to, much less to take on anything new. So we really appreciate your making time for this. If you're here, it's because you care about the future of the libraries at the University of Utah. You saw this town hall advertised and you signed up for it, and you're invested in the vital roles that they play at the center of our campus life. Harriet and I took on this assignment because we both shared that conviction. As faculty in the medical sciences and humanities, respectively, our relation to the libraries is different, but our dependence on their resources is almost constant. We search databases and download journal articles to stay abreast of the latest research. In my case, we comb the archive for older documents and we mine old scholarship for unrealized potential. We share those materials with our students, who in turn use the library's study spaces and meeting rooms and media commons and the expertise of its staff in order to conduct research of their own. When we need something that the libraries don't have, we avail ourselves of its almost invisibly efficient and effortless services to obtain it, temporarily or permanently. Without libraries, we literally could not do our jobs. And if anything, as I hope all of us have had occasion to appreciate this semester, COVID has only thrown the value of our libraries into sharper relief. They continued to function over the summer at a time when most of the university had ceased to do so. They reorganized their spaces, they juggled their staffing, they streamlined their website, they made new databases available in order to compensate for inaccessible physical holdings. They improvised new services to bring those resources directly to users. I mean, they are literally driving books to people's homes. They embedded librarians as research consultants in online classes to help students navigate the transition to remote learning. And they made laptops available to students when laptops are worth their weight in gold.
Your PowerPoint is supposed to be progressing as you speak. I'm on the first page. There you go.
Yeah, I think we don't have as many PowerPoint slides as you might think. It's mostly going to be verbal, but that's okay.
Right.
So when the rest of the university, just to sum up, was holding itself together with duct tape, the libraries actually had the wherewithal to innovate, and we should each of us thank them for that the next chance we get. So fundamental to the charge that Harriet and I are leading is the committee that we're leading is the recognition that our library's mission makes the university's teaching and research missions possible. Thriving libraries are what make a university work, and ultimately what make a university. But due largely to forces beyond their control, the U of U libraries have, for a number of years now, been laboring under severe and escalating budgetary strains of which most of its users are happily oblivious, but that both library leadership and the university's administration agree can no longer be ignored or deferred. So in spring 2020, Senior Vice President Dan Reed convened the Library Futures Task Force to assess and address those issues. And naturally, about 5 minutes after he did so, the pandemic hit, which set us back several months. But the purpose of this town hall is now to apprise the university community of the work this task force is doing, as well as to background why that work is happening and why it's needed. Okay, so let's move into the second slide, which shows us a roster of the task force's membership. You'll notice two things about it, probably around the same time. First, it attempts to represent as broadly as possible the diverse interests and perspectives of all the library's many and various stakeholders. We have faculty from a range of colleges, disciplines, ranks, and professional tracks. We have undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral representatives. We have university staff, members of the non-university community, and what we hope is a good balance between upper and lower campus and between the arts and the sciences. Second, what we do not have is a member from the libraries themselves. This is partly because such representation is already being supplied in the form of the library deans. Alberta Comer, Catherine Sainer, and Melissa Bernstein, the deans of the Marriott, Eccles Health Sciences, and Faust Law Libraries, respectively, have all made themselves available to us in an ex officio capacity. And we've thus far met with them many, many times, as we've been doing with other senior library personnel who, as the resident experts on what the library does and why, are serving as our go-to consultants. So none of this is being undertaken without the full knowledge and cooperation of the library's faculty and staff, and we've endeavored to be just as transparent with them as we're being with all of you. But the omission is also intentional. Part of the goal of this task force is potentially to make hard choices about the future of the libraries that those within its institutional framework may be unwilling to make. Every step is being taken in consultation with them, but SVP Reed wanted the final recommendations to originate outside the libraries themselves and to reflect the will of their users, the entire U of U community. Those recommendations stand to affect all of us, so they need to come from us. So let's move on to our third slide, please, Harriet. So what are the task force's goals? This is going to take a while. The most accurate global description is to say that while they're being driven by a single acute issue, they're far from limited to that issue, although it's impossible to deny its domino effect on the rest of the library's financial health. That primary issue is something called the serials crisis. Some of you may have heard this term before, for others it may be new, so I'll give you a brief rundown. Over the past few decades, the academic publishing industry has degenerated into an oligopoly. It's dominated by just a handful of major publishing firms: Elsevier, Wiley Blackwell, Springer or Springer Nature, and Taylor and Francis. They own the vast majority of scholarly journal titles. This oligopoly does not obtain uniformly across disciplines. It affects STEM fields more than the humanities and the social sciences even more than STEM. But ultimately, it touches all of them. The entire industry has always rested on something of an injustice, if you think about it. Publishers acquire the research labor, editorial labor, and peer review labor of academics essentially for free, and then they sell it back to us through the annual subscription fees our libraries pay at a rather astronomical markup, with profit margins that tend to be well in excess of some household name entertainment conglomerates. But the dominant market share that these publishers now enjoy has in recent years allowed them to do more than that. It's allowed them to dictate contract terms, discouraging their clients from cooperating or even sharing information about the nature of their contracts. It's also allowed them to control pricing menus, whereby they sell journal subscriptions to us only in enormous bundles, tying popular and prestige titles together with low circulation ones, preventing libraries from ordering a la carte, and thereby trying to prioritize the journals that faculty, students, and staff actually use the most, that are most important to them. So for example, if you wanted access to the Lancet, premier medical journal, you have to buy on this model something like Clown Studies Quarterly and 20 other journals like it. And by the way, Clown Studies Quarterly is, I think, not a real journal, so no disparagement of clowns. But this is sort of like cable TV channel packages. These bundles are regressively priced with the express purpose of locking customers into the upper tier bundles. You will end up paying the same for a bundle of 500 of the most essential journals as you would for a bundle of 5,000. So trying to trim the packages that we order just doesn't really work. It's the structure doesn't allow us to do that. Most importantly, their market stranglehold has allowed publishers to continuously raise their fees because they can. To say that these fees have been rising faster than library budgets can keep pace would be an understatement. While base acquisitions funding for Marriott Library has remained relatively flat, pretty static over the past decade, journal pricing has during that same span increased between 4% and 7% annually. So that's year over year, averaging an additional $230,000 expenditure per year. And I want to stress this and clarify it. That's not an increase of $230,000 total over the last 10 years, which by itself would not be a big deal. It's an extra $230,000 that has had to be found in library budgets each and every year. And because this is a compounding percentage, 4%, 7% annually, each year that number, $230,000, that's just an average over that time span. Each year that number keeps growing larger. So this is unsustainable. It's the very definition of an intractable problem. We cannot catch up to it no matter how much money we throw at it. And we are rapidly running out of money to throw at it. Now, as always, the libraries have undertaken heroic efforts to bail water and to maintain continuity of service to their patrons. They've negotiated multi-year contracts with publishers in order to secure the lowest annual rates of increase. They've bought subscriptions in the largest bundles available to get maximal per title discounts. They've canceled hundreds of independent journals and database titles, so that basically all we have left now are the big bundles from the big publishers. Even with these mitigation efforts, however, it won't be long before the libraries are pulled financially underwater. It's already happening. Serial subscriptions are sort of like an ever-expanding whirlpool, and we're the ship, right on the edge of that whirlpool. Eventually, it's going to swallow us. As always, right, so that's our situation. We're not alone in experiencing this, however. This crisis is being felt worldwide, and universities everywhere right now are having the same conversation that we're having. Some libraries and library systems have started to take radical action, like simply letting their contracts lapse, walking away, canceling them, as the 10-campus University of California system controversially elected to do last year. We have exactly 1 year left on our current contract with the largest of these publishers, Elsevier, in which to weigh our options. Now, of course, this is not a story with only good guys and bad guys. The motive for these endless price hikes is not solely corporate greed, much as we'd like it to be. The single largest other factor in the increasing cost of journal subscriptions is the increasing in-house costs of journal production for full-time editors, for translators, for social media presence, which is being driven upward by the steadily growing number and global distribution of academic journals themselves, which are in turn a response to the sheer volume of journal submissions themselves. So, more journals get more and more submissions every year, and they start thinking we need to branch off and create a new journal of this and a new journal of that. There are currently an estimated 45,000 academic journals. This is actually, I was surprised to discover, not a known number, how many academic journals there are worldwide. There are an estimated 45,000 journals publishing some 3 million scholarly articles each year, a number that increases by about 5% annually, roughly proportional to the journal subscription prices that I've just been talking about, which means a cause of this crisis ultimately is us. Like climate change, our way of doing business is the very engine that's putting us out of business. And just like climate change, the reforms required of academic culture, namely encouraging faculty to eschew paywalled journals, prioritizing the placement of our work in public repositories, revising our RPT standards, understanding our own role in the publishing ecosystem we inhabit. All of these reforms require a timetable that we no longer enjoy, as well as a more agile and adaptable profession than the one we currently have. All these solutions need to happen eventually, but our libraries can't afford to wait for them. So the path forward is unclear, but what is clear is that behind us, at our backs, lies a black hole, which is going to continue greedily devouring a larger and larger share of our library's finite budgets until the academic publishing industry either evolves spontaneously on its own into some more benevolent form, or more likely, is forcibly broken by a critical mass of defections. Feeding that black hole predictably has in the meanwhile drained funding away from other library priorities like book acquisitions, which would seem like a pretty basic one, except you might be surprised to discover that, except on an on-demand basis, we've had to suspend all new book acquisitions. We're not buying any new books because we're just feeding the subscription problem, the journal problem. Other priorities like maintaining the university press, all these other things are atrophying. Because we do not know what form our future serials access will take, we have to be open to reconsidering the future of these objectives too. Assuming we can get serial costs down and access to them stabilized, how important is it to us to return to maintaining, building, and housing physical monograph collections? That's a legitimate question, at least to ask in 2020. Likewise, what do we want our university press to do and to be? At the same time as solving the serials problem is meant to relieve the stress on our other library functions, the nature of those other functions shapes what solutions we choose to pursue. So in essence, the way we're seeing this is as an opportunity to globally evaluate all the roles that students, faculty, and staff need the library to play in the university's future, a future that we recognize is deeply uncertain at the moment, but for which now nevertheless remains the time to prepare. So as long as we have the swelling cost of serials strapped to our backs, the library will lack fiscal stability and thus can't really plan for that future. Among the alternative models whose merits we're debating currently is open access, in which scholarly journal articles do not lie behind a paywall that is scaled in our current system by either annual subscription fees for the journal or per use fees for individual article downloads. We make our libraries responsible for those costs so that neither authors nor readers feel them. And we make those benefits conditional on library membership and by extension, university membership. In the open access paradigm, articles are made available for free to all end users, regardless of affiliation. But that doesn't make them free. The cost of enabling such access is folded into the cost of publication and is on some level borne directly by authors themselves. So essentially, the difference between the open access model and the subscription model is paying once upfront at the time of publication, who pays whom, of course, being the operative questions. And on the other hand, with subscriptions, paying on the back end of the research after publication, but doing so continuously, year after year. So you can see how even without the price gouging, subscriptions were never a very equitable or sustainable model to begin with. They're in fact kind of holdovers from when journals were extensions of academic societies, and thus as much about performing exclusivity as about giving access. But that's a story for another day. Now, there are obvious problems with open access. It works far better for some modes of research than others, for some kinds of researchers more than others, with access to some kinds of funding more than others, namely grant funding. Neither is open access likely to be ready by the time we need it, for the simple reason that the content just isn't there. there are still relatively few open access journals, and they do not carry the same status or capital in the academic economy that the established journals do. So militating against a move to open access is the conservatism of the academy itself, which has become kind of a theme for me, whose resistance to change is our own worst enemy here, but also a matter of undeniable fact. One coercive force pushing us toward it, however, is the increasing pressure from governments to comply with federal mandates that open access repositories be created for data and research that were funded through public grants. So in addition to looking at that equation, the task force is studying the experience of institutions that have chosen to end their bundled subscriptions, with the understanding that simply ending them does not constitute a solution, merely the postponement of one, and that the effects of those decisions would not begin to be felt really for another couple of years, when the backlog of new research to which faculty and students now have only contingent access starts to accumulate. We would, in most cases, retain digital access to all the back issues of journals to which we had previously subscribed right up until the moment that those subscriptions lapsed or terminated, but we would lack access going forward. Again, there are profoundly different impacts to examine here for different fields in which knowledge advances at different rates. We're also investigating the possibility of developing partnerships with other regional or peer institutions and using collective bargaining to force more favorable and flexible subscription contracts. Some European universities seem to have had some success with this approach, and the possibility of replicating it is obviously worth exploring. So by no means has any decision been taken at any level to end subscriptions yet. We're considering every possible way to sustainably maintain them, even in the starting in the short term, medium term, long term. That's really, it's the kind of our last ditch option to talk about terminating those contracts. Everything right now is still on the table. Consistent with that, finally, the task force has, as I've mentioned, been charged with assessing a whole range of library operations and initiatives that, in the spirit of 1U, we may want either to scale back or to expand, depending on how much they overlap with other services on campus or deliver better than other services on campus. Or we might decide that a certain amount of duplication is also desirable. More details about that on our next slide, to which we can finally move. Thank you, Harriet. So to delegate all of this work, which sounds more and more daunting to me every time I rehearse it, we've split our task force into 4 subcommittees. Each subcommittee is working alongside liaisons from the library with expertise specific to that topic. And the first of those, obviously, is what I've just been discussing, the serials and open access question. We have a whole subcommittee dedicated to this. It's that complex an issue. And again, despite the language of the PowerPoint slide, it's not a binary problem. Open access is by no means yet a viable, self-contained alternative. Whatever proposals we make will have to involve some combination of solutions. Short-term methods for ensuring continued access to the most valuable journal titles, combined with a long-term platform to replace subscriptions. Should all the other alternatives be exhausted? This is only in the scenario where we cancel subscriptions. There are also a whole bunch of strategies for trying to maintain them and extend the duration of the viability of our subscriptions for as long as possible in the short term, medium term, and again, long term. We'll be happy to get into that a bit later. This is the place to reiterate, though. The recommendations this task force makes are recommendations only. They're non-binding. We're not making university policy. All we're doing is laying out for the administration a set of options, evaluating the pros and cons of each, and advocating for one or several based on our analysis of what will be the least disruptive and the most beneficial to the university as a whole. So the second subcommittee deals with core library services. When we think of core library services, we think of the physical and virtual collection, the library website and its maintenance, the library's human resources, the librarians and staff who interact with and serve the university community, and the physical environmental facilities in which they work. But the last couple of decades have seen the library's role expand to providing access to all sorts of teaching and learning infrastructure, much of it crucial, computing labs, 3D printers, dining. The library is a place to eat, and past a certain hour, it's the only place on campus to eat. how much should the library be taking responsibility for all these services? And how much are they, or how much should they be, the purview of other units? How much has the library been made to pick up the slack for negligence elsewhere? Of those services make better sense reassigned? What initiatives are libraries at other peer institutions currently pursuing that we're not? What can we learn from those trends? How much should the library's role be shaped to the character of our mixed residential and commuter campus? What, in short, do we envision our libraries doing and being 10 years from now or 20 years from now? This is sort of the opportunity to articulate that vision. And implicit in these questions is the issue of centralization. How important is it to us to have a hub at the center of campus that, in addition to defining the center of campus, buys expensive things and makes those things accessible to everyone, even at the cost of duplicating resources? It may sound really appealing when you put it that way. It certainly does to me. But when you consider that it expands the mission of the libraries almost into becoming miniature universities within the university, you can see how ultimately some choices might have to be made. They can't do everything. Third, we have a subcommittee dealing with units that have separate funding streams within the library or associated with the library. Marriott Library plays host to a number of discretely administered units: TLT, CTLE, the Writing Center, both an undergraduate and a graduate one, the Digital Matters Lab, to name just a few. There's a lot more. What is the financial relationship of these units to, in this case, the Marriott Library? There are different ones at the Eccles Health Sciences Library. Even if there's no necessary dependence of one on the other, could their relations to the library be better articulated, better clarified? Could they be better streamlined to the library's advantage? Is it the best allocation of space to play host to experimental programs? Or is that something better left to individual departments and colleges? Again, in sum, is the library the natural home of interdisciplinarity and incubation on campus? And just by the way, for this reason, Faust Law Library is largely being excluded from our analysis. It relies on a funding stream that's sufficiently distinct from Marriott and Eccles that make the latter two really our focus here. And then finally, a subcommittee dealing with potential alternate funding sources. It's probably important to restate here, this is not a line item audit of the library's budget. It's a strategic rethink of the libraries on a conceptual level. We're not efficiency experts looking for redundancies. The function of this task force is not simply to recommend cuts or cost saving measures. In fact, the whole point of getting ourselves out from under the boulder of the serials problem is to liberate funding for other projects. And it may be our determination that other projects which serve vital campus needs deserve increased funding. So accordingly, we've dedicated this last subcommittee to examining the library's funding streams, some of which derive from the state legislature, some from the university's central administration, some from student fees, and some from private donors, and to identifying mechanisms by which those streams can be diversified, stabilized, and augmented and expanded, better to reflect the real value that our libraries contribute to the research and teaching life of the university. So basically, whereas the first subcommittee is about trying to stop the bleeding or stop losing money, this one is about finding the libraries more of it. And for this purpose, the task force also has at its disposal Associate Vice President for Budget, Mark Winter, and we're consulting with him as well. And let's move on to our next slide, Harriet. So the last, but perhaps the most crucial aspect of our work consists of the communication that we're doing or attempting to do right now, meeting with you, the library's user base and members of the U community, gathering your input. Thanks to a MISO survey that the library conducted in 2019, where MISO stands for Measuring Information Services Outcomes, we already have a significant mass of data on raw usage, particularly on what journals and databases people use the most. We want to know a bit more about how you use those journals and databases, about the qualitative rather than just the quantitative side of it, about which titles matter the most to you and shape the course of your research. Where does your research start? What are the essential journals that you consult, without which you can't really begin? This week or the next, we'll be putting into the field a brief, not terribly scientific survey, focusing on the relative value to you of subscription and open access journals, because we think this is the area most likely to undergo change in the next couple of years. We want to assess its potential impact on your research methods. We've also finally, and obviously, scheduled 4 of these university-wide town halls, of which this is the final one. Although, Harriet, you should know we've already been getting requests to do more of them in the spring. And the reason is in order to create a dialogue between you and your libraries, in which we act as kind of the liaisons. So this goes both ways. It's meant to give you a chance to contribute your suggestions to this process, to share with us how you use the library, what aspects of it are the most important to you, even outside of your identity, your role as a researcher or as a teacher, and to voice your concerns, all of which are valid and will be taken into consideration. But it's also meant to reassure you that despite the challenges they currently face, which will take some creativity and resourcefulness to overcome, the libraries remain committed, as they've always been, to meeting the research, teaching, and learning needs of the entire University of Utah population. Okay, so that concludes my preamble, which did amount to about 30 minutes. So that leaves us a good 25 minutes or maybe a little bit more if we choose to go over. Harriet, I'll throw things back over to you.